In my culture, if you want a life partner, you have the option of having an arranged marriage. But when I was looking for a life partner, I did not want to avail this option because I found it highly toxic for reasons I will explain in a totally different video. So I opted for seemingly more modern dating culture instead. Several years and many disappointments and terrible dating experiences later, I realized that dating culture was as toxic, if not more, than arranged marriage culture. For years, I had listened to dating coaches, read every self help book on the topic, and worked really hard on my own psychological and spiritual growth and apparent flaws so that one day I could finally have the healthy, happy, monogamous, long term relationship that I was told would occur as a result of the end result of this self work. What I did not see very clearly at that time was that while I showed up in relationship after relationship with better levels of emotional readiness and psychological maturity as a result of this work, the men I dated had done no such work, like literally never, and were not planning to either. Time after time, getting into and keeping the relationship fell solely on me. And so did the blame when it didn't work out. In spite of working hard to create what I really wanted, I always ended up feeling that I had not done enough or I wasn't enough to create what I desired and had somewhere once again fallen short of some or the other standard, fallen flat on my face once again. And the pain was unbearable. Plus, the judgment I faced from friends and family and society at large was cruel and relentless. The stubborn analyst in me, though, refused to give up and kept digging deep for answers. And one day it happened. I had a huge epiphany. Both modern dating and traditional arranged marriages are still governed by the same system, the Narchiarchy. We've talked about the Narchiarchy earlier, and it's basically a patriarchal system driven by narcissistic values. If you haven't seen that video of mine, I'll post it below in the link and you can watch it to understand what the Narchiarchy is. But regardless of where you are in the world, marriage and dating are part of this very toxic system whose purpose is to give men free access to commitment, sex, and labor from women, while it, on the other hand, instills over responsibility in women, and men are exempt from any real responsibility and accountability. And this over responsibility is imbibed in women through undercurrents that are very insidious, very subtle, but they are built deeply into our social structures and they loom around in the background in the form of expectations that burden women with excessive responsibility, make them desperate, and when they can't fulfill these insane expectations, blind them to the actual manipulation. It also makes them feel inadequate for not meeting impossible standards and force them to try to control the impossible. And in the process, women end up self-abandoning to become the ideal high-value woman that apparently all men covet. Interestingly, the only woman that is somewhat tolerated in the Narchiarchy is actually a female narcissist. And this is the image to what most women are told they must aspire to land a healthy, happy, monogamous, long-term relationship in the Narchiarchy. The pursuit of this image and its promised prize is the perfect relationship ends up creating very unnatural and unnecessary competition among women, and it makes them view men as a prize and marriage as a life achievement. And eventually it messes up their mental health, physical health, and even their lives. And in some cases, in fact, I'm going to say in many cases, if you look at the domestic violence statistics, it puts women in great amounts of physical, emotional, and financial danger. The propaganda is to create a false ideal to aspire to. Remember, narcissism is highly image focused, and the patriarchy is a system that favors men. And the idea is to glamorize and romanticize this false ideal or this false image to make it highly aspirational and keep gaslighting women so that they fall in line and continue to stay in line with this propaganda. Now, the gaslighting occurs through various familial, social, religious institutions and will continue when you try to leave bad situations. And all this propaganda and gaslighting does is create a frenzy, a desperate search for the right man, when in the process, careers, friendships, goals, and the most precious thing, a valuable sense of self, is often thrown away like literally like wrapping paper in this mad rush to basically become a modern slave. So, what are these lies that we have been told that keep us in this situation? So, lie number one is that there are two types of men. So, men apparently are caricatured into two distinct binaries. There is the good guy and the bad guy. And number two is that it is your responsibility to avoid the bad guy as much as possible and land the good guy. And if you're not so lucky and you land the bad guy, then it is your responsibility to make him into the good guy. Number three, it is your responsibility to now hold on to and keep the good guy by any means possible. Number four, your personal preferences, life choices, and achievements notwithstanding, if you can't or won't find the right good man by whatever time and age and keep him and ensure he marries you and that you have 1.5 kids together, you are a worthless, useless being and an overall failure. Number five, if you do manage to achieve number four, congratulations, you will briefly be the belle of the ball and gain lots of attention, praise, admiration, and love from the time leading up to your wedding day, the day itself, and shortly after. Number six, post that, there is something called happily ever after, apparently, which, although realistically is unachievable, it is going to be your sole responsibility to create. Remember, you, the woman in the Narchiarchy, must maintain this image and pass it on to the next generation as well. 7, when things start to go wrong and this artificial construction starts crumbling, which it surely will, you will blame yourself entirely, as of course, maintaining happily ever after, I call it heavily ever after, is all up to you. And if you can't, it must be a personal failure, i.e., pull yourself up by the bootstraps. The messaging that communicates these lies can be overt or covert. More overt messaging, depending on where you are in the world, comes from things like purity culture, prescribed looks, prescribed behaviors and mannerisms that a woman must embody to be able to carry this off. This so-called divine union. and things like the trad wife movement, which have become very popular, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, and also religious dictates. The more covert ways in which these lies can be communicated are through spiritual ideas of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And then there is this whole pop psychology, self help, hustle culture of the high value woman, and toxic male dating coaches taking full advantage of women's desperation and their teachability to gaslight them in new and innovative ways. The messaging boils down to the same thing. If you just do all the right things, look the right way, and be all the right things, you will land this very coveted dream perfect relationship or marriage and live happily ever after. And if you don't do all these things and tick off all these boxes, you won't. And you are going to die a lonely, miserable woman that no one wants to be. The truth is something I had to extricate out of this terrible propaganda. And it's actually very down to earth, very basic. It should be pretty obvious. And it appears to a lot of people that it is obvious. But I am reminding you here that the gaslighting is so powerful that we need constant, strong reminders of these truths. So here they are. Number one, men are just human beings, complex human beings, just like everybody else, and do not neatly fit into binaries of good and bad. Of course, I am not referring to abusive men or men who have a history of violence against women, because obviously that is bad and bad news, and no exceptions can be made on that front. But I am talking about men as a general population. Two, while women are brainwashed to dream of their Prince Charming and their wedding day from, say, the age of 7, men are being taught to dehumanize women and disrespect them from the very same young age. I'm sure you will understand exactly what I mean when I talk about how women are have soul fantasies of Prince Charming sweeping them off their feet, having a man coming into your life and making it all okay. And men, on the other hand, are being taught how to dominate women, how to control them, how to extract labor from them, how to con them, how to abuse them in every possible way, how to disrespect them in locker rooms with disrespectful, crappy talk, or now online forums, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. These, I beg your pardon. Number 3, relationships need to be mutual and healthy for a relationship to really work. It cannot work with the labor and sacrifice of just one person. Now, I know that some of you are going to say, well, that's how relationships have been for the longest time. It has been working on the labor and the sacrifice of one person. But the truth is that it actually hasn't been working, because that one person, usually the woman, is totally exhausted, probably deeply traumatized, and is dying from some kind of autoimmune disease because of this over responsibility and excessive labor. So if we are talking about relationships that are healthy, then that needs everyone involved in that relationship to pull their own weight and to make that effort to support the relationship to work. 4, men and marriage are wonderful things, but they are not achievements to prove your self-worth. And it's perfectly wonderful to need a man, to want a man. In fact, it's pretty natural, because we need each other. And it's normal to be attracted to the opposite sex or even the same sex, depending on what your orientation is. And we need that interaction with each other. We need the connection. We need the love and affection of each other and the warmth in our lives. And good relationships can actually be very healing and soothing to the soul and can actually support us to move forward in life. But the idea that these things are achievements that determine your self-worth is absolutely ridiculous. Supportive, happy, healthy relationships can come in so many forms, and just because they don't exist in your life right now in the form that is prescribed by the Narchiarchy doesn't mean you are worthless. Number 5, happily ever after really doesn't exist, because happily ever after assumes that life works in straight lines. It's like all you have to do is get married, reach that pinnacle, and from there on, it's roses, wine, romantic getaways, and picket fences, and a beautiful life together. And unfortunately, life just doesn't work that way. Yeah? I'm not saying that you can't be happy after marriage. Of course you can, but more often than not, it's just a bumpy road like the rest of life. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's not. So this whole idea that's been sold to us by its very nature is completely flawed and erroneous. The reality is that when partners commit to a long-term relationship, it's actually more about the everyday mundane reality of that relationship that needs to be dealt with. Not very glamorous, not very sexy. Sometimes you have life changes that will come and put a lot of pressure on the relationship. Sometimes you will grow in different ways. Sometimes you will have things that you and your partner don't agree on and have very strong clashes about. So this is more likely to be the case rather than a happily ever after. But when you are trying to impose this very artificial image of happily ever after onto how reality actually works, you are in for a very big disappointment. And also, just to say, that doesn't mean that you can't have a long-term happy marriage. You absolutely can. But that can only happen if you have partners that are really willing to work on themselves and then willing to put in that effort into the relationship. It's because relationships are about what you bring into them. It doesn't have to be a huge effort. Small things, because sometimes love is an action, and sometimes it includes doing things that you may not even really want to do, but you do them because you care and love about you care about and love the other person. Then yes, why not? But if you're not able to achieve that even with one person, or you don't currently have that in your life, please understand that it's because it's very hard to get there. It's not something that looks anything like you have been taught it looks like. Monogamy, by the way, number 6, this is my 6th point, is that monogamy is only for those with a very specific level of emotional maturity and growth and a very specific mindset. Unpopular opinion, but frankly, monogamy may not be achievable for everybody, because it is asking you to stay in one position with one person for the rest of your life, which could be a very long life. And again, life doesn't work this way. Now, I'm not saying that monogamy is not achievable, because I know lots of people who have wonderful, happy, monogamous relationships, but they do not achieve that monogamy just by following a diktat. They've been very deliberate about creating it by maturing and growing themselves and understanding what it really entails and being honest with themselves about whether they are willing to make the sacrifices that that actually entails. So to me, it's something that comes out of a certain personal evolution, and not everybody is going to have the same trajectory with that evolution. Number 7, it is not your job as a woman to hold everything together. If you continue to buy into the lie, you are mostly going to end up very exhausted, traumatized, and deeply resentful, both of your partner and eventually your children as well, because deep inside you know it is you doing all the work. Unfortunately, most men are not trained by the patriarchy or the Narchiarchy, I would say, to participate equally in a relationship. But if you look at nature, there is no structure anywhere in nature that can balance for long when it's imbalanced or the load is imbalanced. For example, even to stand straight, you need 2 legs if you're talking about a human being, and both those legs are supposed to carry your load, and that's how you stand. If you try to balance yourself on just one toe, no prizes for guessing what would happen. You would collapse. And it's not just human beings. If you look at any structure in reality, a load-bearing structure, it is always designed so the load is equally distributed. So this idea of women doing everything in the relationship is not only ludicrous, it goes against all the laws of physics and engineering, and it's pretty much unscientific and ludicrous. As I've said that before, I'm saying it again. Now, the last and very important thing to remember is that most men lack the emotional intelligence as well as the inclination to contribute in a mature, substantial way to a romantic and long-term relationship. And that is not because men are not capable of emotional intelligence or that level of commitment, is because the Narchiarchy has trained them to be entitled and they're not motivated to want to work on themselves and to want to work on their relationships. So for this situation to change, it is very important that men need to start working on themselves and therefore bringing that level of growth into their relationships with women so they can be truly supportive partners to women. Now, some of these truths are hard to accept, as we all have men that we love in our lives, like brothers, fathers, uncles, brothers. But I've already said brothers, sorry. But loving someone doesn't mean you have to be blind to their worst behaviors. And also, as women, we should not ignore the power dynamics that give men dangerous control over our lives. It's very important that we do the inner work to come to realize these truths by ourselves, because the Narchiarchy is at work 24/7 to hoover you back with relentless gaslighting. My prayer is that more and more men and women strengthen their being with these truths, and then we are able to move towards truly fulfilling, loving relationships that we all deserve and that don't need us to abandon ourselves. Let's open ourselves to beauty and love with honesty and freedom, as constantly living a lie will eventually destroy us all.